The Carver Ranch sat at the edge of the plains, where the grass rolled into the first shadows of the hills. When Evelyn and Sarah reached it by wagon, driven by a kindly old storekeeper who had taken pity on them, Evelyn's breath caught. The house was small and worn, boards weathered gray, the porch sagging a little at the corner. Fences leaned tiredly, and the barn door hung askew. A field stretched beyond, once cultivated but now wild with weeds. It was no grand homestead, no dream of comfort, but to Sarah it was everything. The girl jumped from the wagon, dust flying, and ran toward the porch. "See, Miss Evelyn, this is home. Papa built it, it just needs us." Evelyn followed slowly, her shoes crunching the gravel, heart both heavy and uncertain. She had imagined stepping into a man's arms, into a family already half made. Instead, she was walking into ruin with only a child as her anchor. Yet when she reached the porch and Sarah slipped her small hand into hers, she felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in her chest. Maybe that was enough. Inside, the house was clean but bare. Dust coated the furniture, and the hearth was cold. A few pots hung neatly in the kitchen, and a Bible sat open on the table as though Thomas Carver had left in a hurry and would return any moment. Evelyn's throat tightened as she touched its worn leather cover. "Papa always read from that," Sarah said quietly, her voice reverent. "He said God would send help. Maybe he sent you." Evelyn knelt and hugged the girl tightly, though she had no answers. She only knew she couldn't let this child slip through her fingers, not after life had already stolen so much from both of them. That night, after tucking Sarah into a bed piled with quilts, Evelyn sat by the hearth with a single candle burning. The silence pressed against her, heavy with expectation. What did she know of ranching, of fixing fences, of planting fields? She had been raised in a small boarding house in the East, taught how to sew and cook, but never how to hold the weight of a farm. Still, her eyes fell to the small bedroom where Sarah slept, and her spine straightened. She would learn. She would work until her hands bled if that's what it took. The next days proved harder than she imagined. The roof leaked in the rain, and Evelyn climbed with trembling hands to patch it. The weeds in the field fought her every step, and her back ached as she bent hour after hour pulling them free. Neighbors passed by sometimes, their wagons creaking, eyes watching curiously. They whispered, about a stranger woman moving into a dead man's house, about whether she had any right to stay. Evelyn felt their stares like arrows, but she kept her head down and worked. Sarah, always at her side, carried small bundles of sticks, fetched water, or simply skipped in the grass singing tuneless songs. "See, Miss Evelyn," she'd say, proudly holding a crooked handful of kindling. "We're making it ours again." Evelyn would smile despite her exhaustion. One afternoon, while repairing the barn door, Evelyn heard the crunch of hooves. A man dismounted, a broad-shouldered rancher with weathered skin and eyes that looked her up and down with cold calculation. "You're the one that came for Carver," he said flatly. "Yes," Evelyn answered, brushing dust from her skirt. "Thomas is gone. Everyone knows it. That land's gonna be claimed if it ain't kept. Folks are saying you don't belong here. A woman alone with a child can't run a spread." His tone was not cruel, but final, like a judge declaring a sentence. Evelyn's pulse quickened, but she lifted her chin. "This child needs a home. And I gave her my word. I'll find a way." The man studied her, then shook his head with a humorless chuckle. "Strong words. Let's see if they last. Through winter." He mounted and rode away without another word. Evelyn's knees wanted to buckle, but Sarah was watching from the porch steps, small face tense with worry. Evelyn forced a smile, opened her arms, and the girl rushed into them. "Don't listen to him," Evelyn whispered, though her own doubts screamed inside. "We'll make it, I promise." That evening, as the sunset turned the prairie gold, Evelyn knelt in the dirt with Sarah and planted seeds they had found in a jar in the pantry. They pushed them into the soil with bare hands, laughing when the wind caught Sarah's hair and blew it across her face. Evelyn realized then that it wasn't only survival at stake, it was building something new, something theirs. And as she watched Sarah's small fingers pat the earth gently, Evelyn whispered to herself, "This isn't just his land anymore. This is ours." The weeks turned into months, and the little Carver Ranch became a battleground of sweat and stubbornness. Evelyn's hands blistered from mending fences, her back stiffened from hauling water, and her nails were torn from clawing weeds out of the earth. But each sunrise brought Sarah's laughter, bright and clear, and each sunset ended with the girl resting her head against Evelyn's shoulder, whispering, "Good night, Mama." That word, Mama, was both a knife and a bomb. At first, it startled Evelyn. She had never imagined she could fill such a role. But as the days wore on, she realized she wasn't pretending anymore. The child's trust had woven itself around her heart, binding them together like threads of a quilt, imperfect, patched, but strong. Still, the whispers in town did not fade. On market days, Evelyn carried eggs and milk to trade, and she felt the eyes following her. Some women clutched their children closer, others whispered about a widow who wasn't truly a widow, a bride with no husband, a squatter on land that ought to be sold. One morning at the mercantile, she overheard two men muttering. "Can't last," one said. "That place'll be abandoned by Christmas. Better she leave now." Evelyn's grip on the basket tightened until her knuckles whitened. She wanted to shout, to tell them they didn't know her, that they didn't know the strength a woman could summon when a child's future was at stake. But she held her tongue, paid for her flour, and walked out with her head high. Sarah, trotting at her side, sensed her mood. "Don't listen, Mama," she whispered, her little hand slipping into Evelyn's. "They don't know we're strong. Papa said once that God uses small things to do big things. We're just small now, but we'll be big later." The child's faith lit a fire in Evelyn's chest stronger than any insult could snuff. She resolved then that she would not only stay, but prove every last doubter wrong. That resolve was tested when winter came early. Snow fell heavy, blanketing the fields, and the old barn roof sagged under its weight. The firewood pile dwindled too quickly, and Evelyn's hands bled from splitting logs in the freezing wind. There were nights she huddled with Sarah beneath layers of quilts, whispering prayers she hadn't dared speak in years. One night, the storm howled outside and the wind rattled the shutters. Sarah stirred, her lips blue, and Evelyn's heart lurched with terror. She rose, grabbed her shawl, and braved the storm, stumbling through drifts to the barn where she found an old sack of feed she hadn't noticed before. Hidden beneath it were 3 bundles of firewood, stacked neatly, dry, and waiting. She fell to her knees in gratitude, tears freezing on her cheeks. Someone had left them quietly, without wanting thanks. The next day, Evelyn discovered who. When she brought milk to town, the same broad-shouldered rancher she had met before tipped his hat. Slightly. "Your chimney was smoking fine last night," he said, gruffly. "Keep it that way." It wasn't approval, but it wasn't scorn either. And for Evelyn, it was enough to know at least one neighbor had begun to see her differently. Spring came with slow mercy. The ground thawed, shoots of green rose where she and Sarah had planted their seeds. Chicks hatched in the barn, their peeping filling the air with hope. Sarah's laughter grew louder, freer, her cheeks rounding with good food and joy. And Evelyn, though weary, carried herself with a quiet pride she had never known before. When Easter came, the townsfolk gathered at the church. Evelyn sat with Sarah in the wooden pews, their best dresses freshly washed. Whispers fluttered around them, but Sarah held her hand proudly, resting her head against her shoulder as if daring anyone to speak against her mother. After the service, the minister stopped them at the door. His kind eyes looked between Evelyn and the girl. "Miss Hart," he said softly, "this town was not sure what to make of you. But God doesn't always send his blessings in the packages we expect. What you and Sarah have built, it speaks louder than any doubt. You've given her a home, and she's given you a place here." Evelyn's throat closed, but she managed a nod. Sarah beamed, her small fingers squeezing Evelyn's hand until it hurt. And that night, as the sun dipped behind the prairie hills and the ranch glowed golden in its light, Evelyn stood on the porch, Sarah tucked against her side. The fences were straight now, the fields beginning to grow again. The house still sagged a little, but laughter filled it. "You were right," Evelyn whispered to the child. "We are strong, and this is home." Sarah looked up with eyes shining. "I told you, Mama. God sent you." For the first time in her life, Evelyn truly believed it. Not because of a man's promise, not because of a letter, but because a little girl had tugged on her skirt and claimed her with a faith deeper than any vow. And together, against every doubt and every storm, they had turned loneliness into family, and an abandoned ranch into a place of belonging. Summer stretched wide and bright across the plains, bringing with it both promise and trial. The Carver Ranch, once a place of silence and decay, now rang with life. Evelyn rose before dawn to milk the cow, Sarah scampering at her side, and together they carried pails heavy with fresh cream to the kitchen. The vegetable patch they had wrestled from the stubborn earth was finally yielding cucumbers, beans, and squash. Sarah's small hands grew quick at pulling weeds, and she giggled when Evelyn wiped the dirt on her own nose like war paint. Yet not all days were gentle. There were mornings when the sun beat mercilessly, when sweat drenched Evelyn's back as she fixed fences under the glaring sky. When storms rolled suddenly across the horizon, lightning cracking, she had to run out to secure the livestock, Sarah calling to her from the porch in a trembling voice. Evelyn often felt her strength failing, but each time she caught Sarah's eyes, wide with trust, unshaken with faith, she discovered she could go a little further, lift a little heavier, endure a little longer. By midsummer, the whispers in town had changed. At the mercantile, Evelyn overheard not scorn but surprise. "She's still there," one woman muttered. "And by the looks of her, she's making it work." A man nodded, adding, "Girl's got grit, I'll give her that." Evelyn pretended not to hear, but inside her chest, her heart swelled. It was at the church picnic that the true shift began. Sarah darted among the children, chasing a hoop, while Evelyn sat alone with her embroidery. A group of ranch wives watched her from under a shade tree. Then one of them, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, walked over and sat beside her. "You fixed that old barn roof yourself?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn answered cautiously. The woman studied her, then smiled faintly. "My husband had to patch ours last spring, and it nearly broke his back. Folks said you wouldn't last, but, well, you're proving folks wrong." That was the first kindness Evelyn had received beyond Sarah. Soon, others followed. One woman offered her a jar of preserves, another shared advice about curing meat for winter. Slowly, the town's eyes softened, not with suspicion but with grudging respect. But the greatest test was still to come. Late that summer, a wildfire sparked in the hills after a lightning strike. The flames spread quickly, carried by the dry winds, and smoke darkened the sky. Evelyn was mending laundry on the porch when she saw it, a wall of black rising beyond the ridge. "Sarah, inside," she shouted, rushing to gather buckets. But she knew water alone would never stop it. She needed help. Panic clawed at her chest, yet she steadied herself and ran toward town, leaving Sarah in the care of an elderly widow nearby. When she burst into the saloon, faces turned. "The fire's coming," she cried. "If it reaches the Carver place, it'll take the whole valley." There was a pause, heavy and tense. Then the same broad-shouldered rancher who had once told her she'd never last stood. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. "You heard the lady," he barked. "Mount up." Men leapt to their feet. Buckets, shovels, and wet sacks were gathered. Evelyn rode back with them, her heart pounding as smoke filled the air. Together, they dug trenches, beat down sparks, and poured water until their arms screamed with exhaustion. Evelyn fought among them, dirt streaking her face, coughing on the smoke but refusing to stop. Hours passed, and finally, the fire veered away, smothered by their combined effort. When the last ember died, the men sagged with relief. The rancher clapped Evelyn on the shoulder. "Reckon you proved yourself tonight," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "This land's as much yours as anyone's." Tears burned Evelyn's eyes, though she masked them with a nod. She returned to Sarah, who flew into her arms the moment she appeared. "Mama, I prayed so hard," the girl whispered, trembling. "God heard me, didn't he?" Evelyn kissed her hair, holding her tight. "Yes, darling, he heard." From that night, the Carver Ranch was no longer considered a lonely widow's folly. It became a symbol of resilience, of grit, of how love could take root in the most barren soil. Neighbors began stopping by not with suspicion but with greetings, sometimes bringing a sack of grain, other times just to share stories on the porch. Evelyn had found not just survival, but belonging. And through it all, Sarah's laughter was the heartbeat of the home, her faith the compass that guided Evelyn through storms, winters, and fire alike. Now, when Evelyn looked at the ranch in the glow of evening, she didn't see decay and burden. She saw a home built with blistered hands and fierce devotion. She saw a future growing stronger each day, tied together by the simple, profound truth Sarah had spoken the first time they met: "You need a home, and I need a mommy." In that truth, they had found not only each other, but a life worth defending, come drought, storm, or fire.